After yesterday's school shooting, many parents are not sure how to talk to their children about such disturbing acts of violence. The Now Detroit's Saima Chowdhury joins us live right now. And Saima, you actually talked with a psychologist who specializes in trauma. So what'd she say to you today?
Well, she says it's important for parents to be available to their children if they have any questions. And if their kids aren't talking about what happened, that doesn't necessarily mean they're not thinking about what happened.
The last thing anybody expects is to go into what we would consider a safe zone, which is school, and have something like this happen.
Judy Malinowski is a clinical psychologist with the St. John Providence Health System, and she specializes in trauma. She said most kids will have questions after a school shooting like the one in Florida, but being tactful is key.
And a lot of times parents err on the side of giving their children too much information instead of starting a dialogue.
First, she says it's important to know your child's maturity level and have an age-appropriate conversation.
If they're under the age of 10, 8, whatever, they're not going to perhaps have as much exposure or have as many questions. But when you're talking to a teenager, you need to be having those really deep conversations.
It's also important to keep your emotions in check. If you've been looking or acting terrified after seeing the shooting on the news, they will do the same.
And that's the hardest thing, is how do we deal with our own anxiety, our own fear?
And while guns are a focus after a school shooting, Judy says that is not the only topic to discuss.
But let's talk about the real issue, the mental illness. Who was this young man? What was he going through? What would drive somebody to do something like this?
If your child asks how they can protect themselves, you should tell them
there are situations in this world that are not safe. And so that's why we have to practice, some safety things. That's why I want you to be aware of when you get upset, what you can do with your emotions. And so if you see a friend and that friend is having problems with their emotions, how can you then help them?
And Judy says that children could be struggling with this issue even if they're not talking about it or asking questions. It could be coming out in other ways, and parents should be aware of that. If your child has a loss of appetite, nightmares, being really irritable, something out of the norm, you should keep your eyes open for that, Carolyn.
Saima, such good advice for so many parents. So what does Judy say about people who are mentally challenged, and how can we all bring about more awareness?
Well, she says it's important to just remember mental health awareness. Talk about your emotions. Talk about your child's emotions. Having those tools, giving those tools to your kids helps them be more aware of what's going on around them and makes them a little bit more aware of what's going on in school with other kids. A lot of people were saying that the shooter seemed to have some mental health issues, or they weren't surprised that this was the outcome of his rage or his behavior. So that's why Judy says that it's important to talk to your kids. Maybe they could be a little bit more aware of what's going on in their school amongst their other students around them. Are their students having problems as well? Are they having difficulties? Are they putting out their emotions in a different way? So she said it's important that maybe you may not have mental health problems, but it's important to be aware of other people's, and maybe this could be prevented somehow.
So right about that, Saima. A lot of people said that young man was depressed, and that was certainly a warning sign to violence. So good to be aware. Thank you so much for the live report, Saima.